Sarah Olivet had not laughed in 7 years. Not since the day her family's wagon had overturned crossing the Snake River in 1871, taking her parents and younger brother into the churning rapids while she clung to a cottonwood branch and watched them disappear. The sound had died in her throat that day, replaced by a silence so profound that the good people of Leavenworth, Kansas, spoke of her in hushed tones, calling her the Ice Woman, the Ghost Bride, the one who forgot how to smile. She stood behind the counter of Morrison's General Store in the spring of 1878, her blonde hair pulled back so severely it seemed to pain her, her gray eyes flat and empty as winter sky. She was 24 years old and beautiful in the way a marble statue is beautiful, cold and untouchable and perfect in its stillness. Men had tried to court her when she first arrived in town, fresh from the orphanage in Missouri, but her complete lack of response had discouraged even the most persistent. She did not smile at compliments, did not blush at attention, did not frown at rudeness. She simply existed, moving through her days with mechanical precision, selling flour and sugar and nails to the townspeople who pitied her but did not know how to reach her. Nathaniel Owens first saw her on a Tuesday morning, when he came down from his cabin in the hills to trade pelts and restock his supplies. He was a mountain man through and through, 30 years old with shoulders broad as an axe handle and arms thick with muscle from years of setting traps, chopping wood, and hauling game through rough country. His dark hair fell past his collar, often tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered from sun and wind. He stood 6 feet 4 inches in his boots and moved with the easy confidence of a man who had wrestled bears and won. He had heard about the woman who never smiled, the way men hear about legends and tall tales around campfires, but seeing her in person struck something deep in his chest. She was ringing up a purchase for old Mrs. Henderson, her movements efficient and precise, her face showing no more emotion than the wooden countertop beneath her hands. But Nathaniel saw something else, something in the careful way she avoided meeting anyone's eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly when she handled the money. She was not cold. She was broken. And Nathaniel Owens, who had spent the last 8 years alone in the mountains after losing his family to cholera, recognized that particular kind of pain. He approached the counter with his bundle of beaver pelts, waiting as she finished with Mrs. Henderson. When the old woman left, Sarah turned to him with that same blank expression, and he saw up close how truly lovely she was, how her eyes were the color of rain clouds, how her lips would be perfect if they ever curved into a smile. "I need supplies," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He spent weeks at a time without speaking to another soul. "And I would like to trade these pelts." She nodded once, examining the furs with a practiced eye. "These are good quality," she said, her voice soft and toneless. "Mr. Morrison will give you fair credit." "What do you think they are worth?" She named a figure without hesitation, and he could tell she knew her business. He agreed, and she began helping him gather his supplies: coffee, flour, salt, ammunition, a new skinning knife. He watched her move around the store, noting how she avoided brushing past him, how she maintained careful distance from everyone and everything. "Been a mild winter," he tried, attempting conversation. "Yes," she replied, placing a sack of flour on the counter. "Spring came early this year." "It did. Mountain lions have been troublesome. Killed a calf last week." "I see." Her responses were polite but empty, giving him nothing to work with. Most men would have given up, but Nathaniel had tracked wounded elk for days through snow and rain. He had patience. "I am Nathaniel Owens," he said. I have a cabin about 15 miles northwest, up in the high country. Mr. Owens, she acknowledged, tallying his purchases. And you are Sarah Olivet. She paused, her eyes finally lifting to meet his. For just a moment he saw something flicker there, perhaps surprise that he knew her name, perhaps wariness. Then it was gone and she was blank again. I am, she confirmed. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Olivet. She did not say the feeling was mutual. She simply told him his total, accepted his payment, and handed him his change with careful precision, making sure their fingers did not touch. Nathaniel gathered his supplies, but before he left, he turned back. I will be in town again in 2 weeks. I hope to see you then. She did not respond, already turning to organize something behind the counter, dismissing him as thoroughly as if he had ceased to exist. But Nathaniel had seen that flicker in her eyes, that brief moment of reaction. It was enough to build on. For the next 6 months, Nathaniel came to town every 2 weeks like clockwork, far more often than necessary for a man of his solitary habits. Each time he made conversation with Sarah, telling her stories about life in the mountains, about the wildlife he encountered, about the changing seasons and the beauty of the high country. She never responded with more than brief acknowledgments, never asked questions, never showed interest. But she listened. He could tell by the way her hands would still sometimes when he talked, the way she would pause in her work for just a heartbeat before continuing. The townspeople noticed, of course. They whispered about the mountain man who seemed determined to crack the ice around Sarah Olivet's heart. Some took bets on how long he would persist. Others felt sorry for him, wasting his time on a lost cause. You are making a fool of yourself, said Henry Morrison, who owned the general store and employed Sarah. He was a portly man of 50 with mutton chop whiskers and a kind heart. That girl is not right in the head, not since whatever happened to her before she came here. She is as right as anyone, Nathaniel replied, loading supplies onto his pack horse. She is just hurt. Hurt people heal or they do not, Morrison said. Sarah has chosen not. Maybe she just needs a reason. Morrison shook his head but said nothing more. He had grown fond of Sarah in the 3 years she had worked for him. She was reliable, honest, and good with numbers. He paid her a fair wage and rented her a small room above the store. She never caused trouble, never complained, never asked for anything. Sometimes he wished she would. It would at least show she cared about something. Nathaniel continued his campaign through summer and into fall. He brought Sarah things from the mountains. Wildflowers that he left on the counter without comment, interesting rocks he thought she might find pretty, a piece of honeycomb wrapped in wax paper. She accepted these gifts with neither pleasure nor displeasure, simply setting them aside and continuing her work. The flowers died in their wrapping. The rocks gathered dust. The honeycomb disappeared, and he never knew if she ate it or threw it away, but he did not give up. In September, he tried a different approach. Instead of just talking to her, he asked her opinion. I am thinking of expanding my trap line further north, he said, but I am uncertain if the territory is already claimed. What do you think? She looked at him with those flat gray eyes. I do not know anything about trap lines, Mr. Owens. But you are intelligent, you might have thoughts anyway. I do not. If you were me, would you risk it? She was silent for a long moment, and he thought she would refuse to answer. Then she said, risk is part of survival. If you do not risk, you do not grow. But if you risk foolishly, you die. You would need to scout the territory first before committing. It was the longest statement she had made to him in 6 months, and triumph surged through his chest. That is good advice, he said quietly. Thank you, Miss Olivet. Something flickered in her eyes again, there and gone so fast he might have imagined it. The following week, 3 men rode into Leavenworth looking for trouble. They were drifters, the kind that moved from town to town, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction behind. They came into Morrison's store demanding whiskey, which Morrison did not sell, and when he told them to try the saloon down the street, they began helping themselves to supplies anyway. Sarah was working the counter when they started filling their saddlebags with goods. "You need to pay for those items," she said, her voice as flat and emotionless as always. The leader, a man with a scarred face and mean eyes, looked at her with slow appreciation. "Pretty thing like you ought to smile more," he said. "Tell you what, give us a smile and maybe we will pay." "You will pay regardless," Sarah said, "or you will put the items back." The man laughed, a harsh sound. He walked toward her and she did not back away. She simply stood there, watching him come with no more emotion than if she were watching paint dry. It seemed to unsettle him, her complete lack of fear. "You got ice in your veins, girl?" he asked. "You need to leave," she replied. He reached across the counter for her, and that was when Morrison emerged from the storeroom with his shotgun. "You heard the lady," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. "Get out of my store." The three men assessed the situation, weighing whether it was worth the trouble. Finally, the leader spat on the floor and jerked his head at his companions. "This town is not worth our time anyway," he said. They left without paying, taking the goods they had already pocketed. After they were gone, Morrison lowered the shotgun with shaking hands. "Are you all right, Sarah?" he asked. "I am fine," she said, and went back to organizing the shelves they had disturbed. When Nathaniel came to town 2 days later, Morrison told him what had happened. Rage, hot and fierce, flooded through Nathaniel's veins. "Did they hurt her?" he demanded. "No, no. But they frightened her, I am sure, even if she did not show it." Nathaniel found Sarah at the counter, same as always. "Mr. Morrison told me about the trouble," he said. "It was handled," she replied. "Those men might come back. Then Mr. Morrison will handle it again. Sarah." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it made her pause. "You could have been hurt, but I was not. That does not mean you should not be careful." She finally looked at him directly, and for the first time he saw something like irritation in her eyes. It was emotion, real emotion, and it made his heart race. "I am always careful, Mr. Owens," she said. "I have been careful every day for 7 years. Careful keeps you alive, but careful does not keep you from danger. Danger finds you regardless. Then let someone stand with you when it does." "Why?" The question was sharp, cutting. "Why do you keep coming here? Why do you keep talking to me? I have given you no encouragement. I have been nothing but cold to you. What do you want from me?" He held her gaze, seeing past the anger to the fear beneath. "I want to hear you laugh," he said simply. She stared at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. "Laugh? Yes, just once. I want to hear what it sounds like when joy reaches your heart." "I do not have joy in my heart. You could, if you let yourself." She turned away from him then, her movements sharp. "Joy is for people who have not lost everything. Joy is for people who do not know how quickly it can be destroyed. I will not laugh again, Mr. Owens. Not ever. So you are wasting your time." "Maybe," he acknowledged. "But it is my time to waste." She did not respond, and after a moment he left. But her words stayed with him as he rode back into the mountains. She had spoken more in that brief conversation than in all the months before combined. Her anger was real, her pain was real. She was not lost. She was hiding, and hiding meant there was still something inside worth protecting. October brought early snow to the high country, and Nathaniel found himself thinking about Sarah as he worked his trap line. He wondered if she was warm enough in that little room above the store. He wondered if she ever looked at the mountains and thought about him. He wondered what her laugh would sound like, what her smile would look like, what it would feel like to hold her and feel her heart beat against his. He had not expected to fall in love with her. He had simply wanted to help, to reach someone who seemed as alone as he had been. But somewhere between her flat gray eyes and her careful distances, between her broken silence and her fierce independence, he had lost his heart. He loved her strength, the way she kept going even when she had nothing to go for. He loved her dignity, the way she held herself together with such determination. He loved the glimpses of who she must have been before tragedy struck, the woman who surely must have laughed and smiled and felt joy. He wanted to give that back to her. He wanted to be the one who reminded her that life could be good again. When he came to town in late October, he brought her something different. It was a carving he had made during long evenings by his fire, a small wooden bird with wings spread in flight. He had worked on it for weeks, getting every feather right, sanding it smooth, rubbing it with oil until it glowed. He set it on the counter in front of her. "I made this for you," he said. She looked at it for a long moment, not touching it. "Why a bird?" "Because birds are free," he said. "They go where they want, sing when they want, fly above everything that weighs them down. I thought you might like to be reminded that freedom is possible." She was quiet, so quiet he could hear the clock ticking on the wall behind her. Then she reached out and picked up the bird, holding it carefully in her palm. Her fingers traced the carved feathers, and he saw her throat move as she swallowed. "It is beautiful," she said finally, and her voice was not flat. It was soft and thick with something that might have been tears. "So are you," he said. "Even in your sadness, Sarah, you are beautiful." She looked up at him, and he saw that her eyes were wet. She had not cried in 7 years, the townspeople said, any more than she had laughed. But now tears gathered on her lashes, and one spilled over, tracking down her pale cheek. "I cannot do this," she whispered. "I cannot let you care about me. Everyone I have cared about has died. Everyone I have loved has been taken away. I cannot survive that again." "So you choose not to care about anyone, not to love anyone. That is not surviving, Sarah. That is just existing. Existing is enough." "It is not," he said firmly. "You deserve more than that. You deserve to be happy." "Happy," she said the word like it was poison. "I do not remember what happy feels like." "Then let me show you." She shook her head, closing her fingers around the wooden bird. "You should stop coming here, Nathaniel. You should find someone who can give you what you want, someone who is not broken." "You are not broken. You are hurt." "There is a difference, please." The word was barely audible. "Please just leave me alone." It broke his heart, but he respected her wishes. He nodded once, gathered his supplies in silence, and left. He did not look back, even though everything in him wanted to. He stayed away for a month. It was the longest month of his life. He threw himself into work, checking his traps, hunting for winter meat, chopping enough wood to last through the snows. But every night, sitting by his fire, he thought about her. He wondered if she kept the bird or threw it away. He wondered if she missed him, even a little. He wondered if he had given up too easily. When he finally could not stand it anymore, he rode back to town in late November. The first snow had fallen, dusting the streets of Leavenworth with white. He tied his horse outside the general store and went inside, steeling himself for her coldness. But Sarah was not behind the counter. Morrison was there instead, looking grave. "Where is she?" Nathaniel demanded, fear spiking through him. "Upstairs. She is sick. Been sick for 3 days now. Fever and cough. I wanted to fetch the doctor, but she refused." Nathaniel did not wait for permission. He went to the back stairs and climbed them 2 at a time. Sarah's room was at the end of the hall, and he knocked once before opening the door. She was in bed, and even from across the small room he could see the flush of fever on her cheeks. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, damp with sweat. She opened her eyes when he entered, and confusion clouded her gaze. "Nathaniel," she whispered. "I am here," he said, crossing to her side. He touched her forehead and swore under his breath. She was burning up. How long have you been like this? Days. I do not know. Time is strange. Have you been drinking water, eating? She did not answer, which was answer enough. He went to the small kitchen area in the corner of the room and found a pitcher of water, a cup, and a basin. He came back to her bedside and helped her sit up enough to drink. She was weak, leaning heavily against him, and it terrified him how fragile she felt. I am going to take care of you, he said. No arguments. You should not be here, she protested, but her voice was thin. You will get sick. I have survived blizzards and bear attacks. I can survive a fever. He spent the next 3 days at her bedside, leaving only to get supplies. He bathed her face with cool water when the fever raged. He made her drink broth and tea. He changed her sweat-soaked sheets and nightgown with clinical efficiency, his respect for her modesty absolute even in her delirium. He sat with her through the long nights when she thrashed and murmured in her sleep, talking to people who were gone, calling out names he did not recognize. On the 3rd night, the fever broke. She woke in the early hours of morning, clear-eyed and lucid for the first time. He was dozing in the chair beside her bed, and she watched him for a long moment. His hair was loose around his shoulders, his shirt open at the collar. Even in sleep, he looked strong and solid, like a mountain himself, unshakable and eternal. Nathaniel, she said softly. He woke instantly, leaning forward. Sarah, how do you feel? Weak, but better. She paused. You stayed. Of course I stayed. Why? Because I love you, he said simply. I have loved you since the moment I saw you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and your wounded heart. I love who you are now and who you used to be and who you could be again. I love you, Sarah Olivet, and I will keep loving you whether you want me to or not. She stared at him, tears filling her eyes again. I am afraid, she whispered. I am so afraid to feel anything. It hurts too much when it is taken away. I know, he said. But love is worth the risk. Living is worth the risk. What if I cannot? What if I have been frozen too long? He reached out and took her hand, the first time she had allowed him to touch her like this. Her fingers were small and cold in his. Then I will wait. I will wait as long as it takes for the thaw. She gripped his hand tighter as if he were the only thing keeping her from drowning. The bird, she said. I kept it. I keep it beside my bed. It is the first thing I see in the morning and the last thing I see at night. I am glad, he said. I wanted to throw it away. I wanted to harden my heart against you, but I could not. You made me feel something, Nathaniel, and I resented you for it. I have been so angry at you. I know. But when I was sick, when I was in the fever, I kept dreaming you were there. And when I would wake and you actually were there, I felt something I had not felt in 7 years. What did you feel? Safe, she whispered. I felt safe. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. You are safe with me, always. I promise you that. She closed her eyes and a tear slipped free. My family, she said. They drowned in the Snake River. I watched them die and could do nothing. I have not spoken of it since it happened. I could not. You do not have to tell me, he said, but I want to, I need to. She opened her eyes again, looking at him directly. We were heading west like so many others, looking for a better life. The river was high from spring melt, but Papa thought we could make the crossing. The wagon overturned in the middle of the river. I was thrown clear, caught a branch, but they were trapped. Mama, Papa, and my brother Thomas. He was only 9 years old. Her voice cracked, but she continued. I screamed for help. I screamed until my throat bled, but there was no one close enough. I watched them go under, watched the water take them, and I knew it was my fault. Sarah, no. I had begged Papa to let us cross that day. He wanted to wait, but I was impatient. I wanted to reach Oregon. I wanted adventure, and my childish impatience killed them all. You were not responsible for the river rising. You were not responsible for the wagon overturning. You were a child, Sarah. It was not your fault. I know that in my head, she said, but my heart does not believe it. My heart says I do not deserve to be happy when they are dead. My heart says loving someone again is a betrayal of them. Your family would not want you to spend your life in grief. How do you know? Because if I died and you grieved for me, I would want you to live. I would want you to find joy again. I would want you to laugh and love and be happy. That is what love wants for the beloved, not endless sorrow. She was crying openly now, 7 years of unshed tears finally breaking free. Nathaniel moved from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed, and he gathered her into his arms. She stiffened at first, then melted against him, sobbing into his chest while he held her and stroked her hair and murmured words of comfort. She cried for a long time, purging the poison that had been building inside her. When she finally quieted, she stayed in his arms, exhausted but somehow lighter. "I am so tired," she whispered. "I am so tired of being alone. You do not have to be alone anymore. What if I do not remember how to be with someone? Then we will figure it out together." She pulled back enough to look at him, searching his face. "Why? Why do you want someone as damaged as me? You are not damaged. You are surviving. And I want you because you are brave enough to keep going even when you have every reason not to. I want you because you are strong and honest and true. I want you because when I look at you, I see home." Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the ice that had encased her heart. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "I do not know how to let someone in. Start small. Let me take care of you while you recover. Let me bring you meals and sit with you. Let yourself enjoy my company without overthinking it." She considered this, then nodded slowly. "I can try. That is all I ask." He stayed with her for another week, sleeping in the chair in her room, tending to her as she regained her strength. Morrison covered the store, pleased to see Sarah finally accepting help. The townspeople gossiped, of course, about the mountain man and the ice woman, but there was approval in their whispers now. Everyone loved a romance, especially one that seemed impossible. As Sarah healed, Nathaniel told her stories about his life. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about his parents and younger sister who died of cholera when he was 22. He told her about fleeing to the mountains because he could not bear to stay in the places they had lived. He told her about the loneliness of those first years, the way grief had nearly destroyed him too. "How did you survive it?" she asked one afternoon. They were sitting by the small window in her room, watching snow fall over Leavenworth. "I gave myself small purposes," he said. "First it was just surviving each day. Then it was building a better cabin. Then it was having the best trap line in the territory. Little things that gave me reason to keep going. And slowly, very slowly, the grief became bearable." "Did you ever think you would love someone again?" "No," he admitted. "I thought I would spend my life alone. I was content with that, or I thought I was. Then I saw you and everything changed." "What did you see in me? I was nothing but cold to you." "I saw myself," he said. "I recognized the look in your eyes because I had seen it in my own mirror. And I thought, if I could reach you, maybe it would mean I had truly healed too. Maybe it would mean grief does not have to win." She was quiet for a moment, turning his words over in her mind. "You are a good man, Nathaniel Owens." "I am a patient man," he corrected with a small smile. "There is a difference." She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. His strength was not just in his muscled arms and broad shoulders. It was in his steady presence, his unfailing kindness, his willingness to wait for her. He had not pushed or demanded. He had simply been there, solid and sure as the mountains he called home. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like to try to live again, to feel again. With you." His smile grew, transforming his weathered face. "Yeah, yes, But I cannot promise it will be easy. I cannot promise I will not be frightened or pull away sometimes. I do not need promises, Sarah. I just need you to try." She reached out and took his hand, the gesture still new and uncertain but genuine. "Then I will try." Over the next weeks, as winter deepened over Kansas, Nathaniel courted Sarah properly. He took her to the restaurant for dinner, where she sat stiffly at first, unused to being the center of attention. He walked with her around town, his large hand gentle on her arm. He brought her small gifts: a better pair of gloves when he noticed hers were worn, a book of poetry because Morrison mentioned she liked to read, a shawl in a soft blue that matched her eyes. For Christmas, he gave her something more significant. It was a music box he had bought from a traveling merchant, small and delicate with a painted bird on the lid. When she opened it, a sweet melody played and the bird spun in circles. She stared at it for a long moment, and he worried he had made a mistake, been too forward. Then she looked up at him and he saw wonder in her eyes. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Music is a kind of joy," he said. "I thought you might like to have some." She wound the music box and listened to the melody, her expression thoughtful. "When I was a little girl," she said slowly, "Mama had a music box. She would play it in the evenings and we would dance in our wagon. Papa would swing me around until I was dizzy and Thomas would laugh at me." It was the first time she had spoken of her family with something other than pain. The memory was still sad, but there was sweetness in it too, a gentle nostalgia rather than sharp grief. "They loved you," Nathaniel said. "They did. Very much. Then they would be happy you are remembering the good times, not just the bad." She nodded slowly. "I think you are right." She looked at him, and there was something new in her expression, something warm and alive. "Thank you, Nathaniel, for this, for everything. You are welcome." She stood, still holding the music box, and stepped closer to him. They were in her room above the store, the only place they had real privacy. She was near enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, see the individual lashes around her gray eyes. "I would like to kiss you," she said, the words tumbling out quickly as if she feared she would lose courage. If that would be acceptable, his heart thundered in his chest. More than acceptable. She rose on her toes and he bent down to meet her halfway. The kiss was soft and tentative, barely more than a brush of lips. But it was real and it was willing, and it filled him with such fierce tenderness he thought his chest might burst. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes wide. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh," he repeated, smiling. "I had forgotten," she whispered. "I had forgotten what it feels like to want something, to want someone. And do you want me?" "Yes," she said, the word barely audible but certain. "I do." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she melted into him with a soft sound that was almost a sigh. His arms came around her, careful of his strength, holding her like she was precious. And she was. She was the most precious thing in his world. They stood there for a long time, learning the shape of each other, the feel of shared breath and tangled hope. When they finally parted, Sarah was smiling. It was small and uncertain, but it was a smile, the first anyone in Leavenworth had seen on her face in 3 years. "Look at that," Nathaniel said softly. "You smiled." Her hand flew to her mouth in surprise. "I did." "You are even more beautiful when you smile." She blushed, a color rising in her pale cheeks that made her look alive in a way she had not before. "I feel strange, light, like I might float away." "That is happiness," he told her. "Hold on to it." She did. Over the following months, as winter gave way to spring in 1879, Sarah slowly came back to life. She smiled more often, small secret smiles that lit her face from within. She talked more, sharing her thoughts and opinions. She laughed once, a surprised burst of sound when Nathaniel told her a story about a raccoon that had raided his cabin, and the sound was so beautiful, so pure and genuine that it stopped him mid-sentence. "What?" she asked, seeing his expression. "You laughed," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She blinked, then her eyes widened. "I did, I laughed." "How did it feel?" She considered the question seriously. "Good," she said finally. "Strange, but good, like finding something I thought was lost forever." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I love you so much," he said into her hair. "I love you too," she replied, and it was the first time she had said the words. They felt new and fragile on her tongue, but also right. So very right. In April, Nathaniel asked her to marry him. They were up in the mountains at his cabin, where he had brought her to see his home. She had been nervous about being so far from town, but once she saw the beauty of the high country, saw the view from his porch and the peace of the forest around them, she understood why he loved it. He proposed at sunset when the sky was painted gold and pink. He had no ring, only his heart and his hope, but he offered them both freely. "Sarah Olivet," he said, taking her hands in his, "will you marry me? Will you share this life with me, up here in these mountains? I know it is not easy living. It is isolated and hard, but I promise I will love you every day. I promise I will protect you and cherish you and work to hear your laughter as often as I can. Will you be my wife?" She looked at him, this big, strong man with his gentle heart, and she knew her answer had been inevitable from the moment he first walked into the general store. He had saved her life, not from drowning or sickness or danger, but from herself. He had reminded her that living was worth the risk. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed, the sound echoing through the mountains like bells. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools, happy in a way neither had thought possible again. They married in May in a simple ceremony in Leavenworth. Morrison gave Sarah away, tears running down his round face. The whole town came to witness, curious to see the ice woman transformed. Sarah wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair that Nathaniel had picked that morning. She smiled throughout the entire ceremony, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, she kissed Nathaniel with such joy that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. At the reception, held in the church hall with food donated by half the town, Sarah laughed openly and often. She danced with her new husband, then with Morrison, then with several of the men who had once tried to court her and failed. She was gracious and warm, a completely different woman than the one who had stood behind the store counter with dead eyes. "I cannot believe the change in you," Morrison said when he danced with her. "It is like you are a completely different person." "I am still me," Sarah said. "But I am me again. The me I was supposed to be before grief took her away. Nathaniel did that. Nathaniel showed me the way back," she corrected. "But I had to choose to walk it. I am happy for you, my dear, truly happy. Thank you for everything, for giving me a job when I had nothing, for being patient with me, for being kind." "You were always worth the kindness," Morrison said. "I am just glad you finally believe that." After the reception, Nathaniel took his bride up into the mountains, to the cabin that would now be their home. Sarah had quit her job at the store, and though she felt a pang at leaving, she knew this was right. Her future was not behind a counter in town. It was here, in the high country, with this man who had loved her back to life. The cabin was small but sturdy, built by Nathaniel's own hands. He had added touches for her in the weeks before the wedding: shelves for her books, a better stove for cooking, a rocking chair he had crafted himself. She walked through it, touching things, claiming this space as her own. "It is perfect," she said, turning to him. "Truly." "It is better now that you are here," he replied. That night they came together as husband and wife, learning each other in the most intimate way. Nathaniel was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Sarah, who had been frozen for so long, discovered that her body still knew how to respond, how to feel pleasure, how to give and receive love. In his arms, she felt beautiful and wanted and whole. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, her head on his broad chest, his hand stroking her hair. "I never thought I would have this," she said softly. "A husband, a home, a future that I actually want to live." "You have it now," he said. "We have it now." "Are you happy, Nathaniel?" "Truly, happier than I have ever been." She lifted her head to look at him. "So am I," she said and smiled. "I know I am supposed to say I was happy before, or I was happy with my family, and I was, but this is different. This is a happiness I chose, a happiness I fought for." "That makes it even more precious." He kissed her forehead. "I will spend every day making sure you never regret that choice. I know you will. Life in the mountains was indeed hard, but it was good." Sarah learned to do things she had never done before: splitting wood, tanning hides, preserving meat, making soap. Nathaniel taught her to shoot, and she became quite good at it, able to bring down a deer at 100 yards. She learned to read the weather, to track animals, to move quietly through the forest. But more than the practical skills, she learned to be still. To sit on the porch in the evening and watch the sun set without feeling the need to fill the silence. To enjoy the simple pleasure of cooking dinner for someone she loved. To sleep deeply and peacefully, knowing she was safe. And she laughed. She laughed often. At Nathaniel's terrible jokes, at the antics of the wildlife around their cabin, at her own mistakes when she was learning something new. The sound came easily now, no longer locked away behind walls of grief. One evening in late summer, they were sitting on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Sarah was in her rocking chair, knitting a blanket, while Nathaniel whittled a new handle for his axe. "I am with child," Sarah said suddenly, not looking up from her knitting. Nathaniel's hands stilled. "What? I am pregnant, about 2 months along, I think." He set down his whittling and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair. "Sarah, are you certain as I can be?" "I have all the signs Mama told me about when I was younger." "How do you feel about it?" She finally looked at him, and her eyes were bright with tears, but they were happy tears. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also joyful. I want this, Nathaniel. I want to have your child. I want us to be a family." "Are you afraid?" he asked gently, knowing her history. "Yes, I am afraid something will go wrong. I am afraid I will lose them like I lost everyone else. But I cannot live my whole life in fear. You taught me that." He took her hands, knitting and all. "We will get through this together. Whatever happens, we will face it together. I know. That is why I can do this." He kissed her then, tasting salt from her tears, feeling the tremor of her fear and the strength of her courage all mixed together. "You are going to be an amazing mother," he said. "I hope so. I want to be. I want to give this child everything I had and lost. Love and laughter and joy. They will have all that and more." As her pregnancy progressed, Nathaniel was attentive and protective, sometimes to the point of being overbearing. He did not want her chopping wood or lifting anything heavy. He made sure she ate well and rested often. He rubbed her feet when they swelled and held her when the fears became too much. In March of 1880, when the snow was still deep on the ground but the promise of spring was in the air, Sarah went into labor. Nathaniel had brought a midwife from town a week earlier, a practical woman named Mrs. Burke, who had delivered half the babies in Leavenworth. She took charge of the situation with calm efficiency while Nathaniel paced and worried. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Sarah was strong, but there were moments when fear overwhelmed her, when she was certain something would go wrong, that she would lose this baby too. "I cannot do this," she gasped during a particularly hard contraction. "I cannot." "You can," Nathaniel said, holding her hand, his voice steady even though he was terrified. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do this. What if something goes wrong? Then we will handle it. But nothing is going wrong. You are doing beautifully." Mrs. Burke echoed his words. "You are doing just fine, dear. The baby is coming, just a little longer." And finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Sarah's son was born. He came into the world squalling, healthy and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's strong lungs. "A boy, Mrs. Burke said, laying him on Sarah's chest. "A beautiful baby boy." Sarah looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect face, and burst into tears. They were tears of relief and joy and overwhelming love. Nathaniel was crying too, his weathered face wet with emotion as he looked at his wife and child. "We have a son," Sarah whispered. "We have a son," Nathaniel repeated, his voice thick. He touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant gripped his finger with surprising strength. They named him Thomas after Sarah's lost brother. It was her idea, and Nathaniel agreed immediately. It felt right to honor the past while celebrating the future. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong. He nursed well and slept reasonably well and filled their cabin with his cries and coos. Sarah took to motherhood with determination and tenderness, learning as she went. Nathaniel was a devoted father, singing to his son in the evenings, carrying him around the cabin, teaching him about the world even though the baby was far too young to understand. "He is going to grow up in the mountains," Nathaniel said one evening, holding Thomas while Sarah prepared dinner. "He will know how to survive out here, how to be strong and independent." "He will," Sarah agreed, "but he will also know love and laughter and joy. He will have all of it, because of you, because you chose to live." She smiled at him, the expression coming easily now, as natural as breathing. "Because of us. We chose this together." Over the years that followed, their family grew. A daughter named Emily was born in 1882, with her mother's gray eyes and quiet disposition. Then another son, William, in 1884, who was loud and adventurous from birth. The cabin expanded to accommodate them all, with Nathaniel adding rooms and eventually building a second structure for storage and work. Life was not always easy. They faced harsh winters, illnesses, injuries, and disappointments. But they faced them together, their love for each other and their children carrying them through. Sarah never forgot the darkness she had survived, but it no longer defined her. She was more than her grief now. She was a wife, a mother, a woman who had learned to live fully. One evening in the summer of 1889, when Thomas was 9, Emily was 7, and William was 5, the family sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the dusk. The children were running around trying to catch the glowing insects, their laughter bright in the mountain air. Sarah sat in her rocking chair, now worn smooth from years of use, watching them with a peaceful smile. Nathaniel sat beside her, his hand holding hers, their fingers naturally intertwined. "You remember," she said softly, "when you told me you wanted to hear me laugh? I remember. It was the day you finally got angry at me, the day I knew you were still in there. I thought you were insane. I thought there was no possible way you could make me laugh again. But I did. You did." She looked at him, her eyes full of love. "You gave me back my life, Nathaniel. I do not know what would have become of me if you had not been so stubborn. You would have found your way eventually. You are strong. Maybe. But it would have taken much longer, and it might have been too late." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for letting me in, for being brave enough to try." Thomas came running up then, holding a firefly cupped in his hands. "Mama, look, I caught one. He is beautiful," Sarah said, "but you should let him go soon. He wants to be free." I know, I just wanted to show you first." He opened his hands, and the firefly crawled up his fingers before taking flight, rejoining its fellows in the growing darkness. Emily and William came running up too, breathless and happy. "Papa, tell us a story," Emily demanded. "Yeah, tell us about when you were a trapper," William added. Nathaniel laughed, a deep, rich sound. All right, let me see." He launched into a tale about tracking a wolf through the snow, embellishing for effect, making the children gasp and giggle. Sarah listened to her husband's voice, to her children's laughter, to the evening sounds of the mountains around them. This was her life now. This noise and joy and love. This beautiful, precious, hard-won happiness. She had been the woman who never laughed, frozen in grief so deep she thought she would never escape. But Nathaniel had seen past the ice to the woman beneath. He had waited and worked and loved her until she was ready to live again. He had made it his life's work to hear her laugh, and now that sound filled their home every day. She stood and moved to stand beside him, putting her hand on his shoulder. He paused in his story to look up at her, and the love in his eyes still made her heart race after all these years. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," he replied. The children groaned. "Mama, you are interrupting the story." Sorry, she said, laughing. She sat back down, and Nathaniel continued his tale. Later that night, after the children were in bed and the cabin was quiet, Sarah and Nathaniel lay together in their bed. The window was open, letting in the cool mountain air and the sound of crickets. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathaniel asked softly. "Leaving town? Living up here where it is so isolated?" "Never," she said without hesitation. "This is where I belong, with you, with our family. This is home. Good, because I cannot imagine life without you. You will never have to. I am here, I am alive. And I am never going back to that frozen place I was in before." He pulled her closer, and she settled against him with a contented sigh. They were silent for a while, comfortable in the quiet. "Nathaniel," she said eventually. "Yes. What made you so certain you could reach me?" "Everyone else had given up." He thought about it for a moment. "I think because I recognized myself in you. I knew what it was like to want to give up, to feel like there was no point in going on. But I also knew that somewhere deep down, there is always a spark that wants to live. Always. Even when everything seems hopeless, I just had to find that spark in you and give it air to breathe. You did more than that. You became my reason to live." "No," he corrected gently. "You became your own reason to live. I just reminded you what you were missing." She smiled in the darkness. "We can both be right. We can both be right," he agreed. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and harvests, by Christmases and summers, by all the ordinary moments that make up a life. The children grew strong and capable, learning from their parents how to survive in the mountains but also how to love deeply and live fully. Thomas, the eldest, grew tall and serious like his mother had been, but with his father's steady strength. Emily was quiet and thoughtful, happiest with a book in her hands or drawing pictures of the mountains she loved. William was the wild one, always climbing trees and exploring caves and giving his mother gray hairs with his adventures. Sarah loved them all fiercely, protective in the way of mothers, but also determined not to let her fear constrain them. She knew what it was like to be ruled by fear, and she would not pass that on to her children. So she let them explore and fall and learn, always ready to comfort and guide but never to smother. Nathaniel was an excellent father, patient and kind, but also firm when necessary. He taught his sons to hunt and trap, taught his daughter to shoot as well as any boy, taught all of them to respect the land that sustained them. He told them stories about their mother, about her courage and strength, making sure they knew how remarkable she was. In 1895, when Thomas was 15, he asked about his name. "Why am I called Thomas?" he wanted to know. "Do I have a grandfather named Thomas?" Sarah had known this question would come eventually. She sat him down and told him the story of her first family, of the wagon overturning in the Snake River, of the brother who had drowned at 9 years old. "I named you after him," she said, "because I wanted to remember him. But also because naming you Thomas felt like a promise that grief would not win, that life and love would continue despite loss." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "That must have been terrible," he said finally, "to watch them die. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me. For a long time I did not want to live because of it. But you did. You lived and married Papa and had us. I did. And I am so grateful I made that choice, because otherwise I would have missed all this. I would have missed you and your sister and brother. I would have missed the happiness I have now. I am glad you chose to live, Mama." She hugged him tight, this boy who was almost a man, who was named after a ghost but fully alive. "So am I, sweetheart, so am I." The children eventually grew up and made their own choices. Thomas stayed in the mountains, building his own cabin a few miles from his parents, trapping and hunting like his father. He married a girl from town named Rebecca, and they gave Sarah and Nathaniel their first grandchildren. Emily surprised everyone by wanting to be a teacher. She moved to Leavenworth and started a school, teaching children to read and write and think. She married a banker's son, a kind man who supported her ambitions. William was the adventurer of the family. He left Kansas entirely, heading west to Wyoming, then Montana, then even farther. He wrote letters describing mountains even bigger than those in Kansas, rivers that made the Snake River look like a stream, adventures that made his mother's heart clench with worry and pride in equal measure. Through it all, Sarah and Nathaniel stayed in their mountain cabin, growing older together. Nathaniel's hair turned gray, then white, but he remained strong, still chopping wood and checking his traps well into his 60s. Sarah's face gained lines, but they were lines of laughter and love, not bitterness and grief. They took walks together every evening when the weather allowed, holding hands like young lovers. They sat on their porch and watched sunsets, counting themselves blessed. They made love with the familiarity and tenderness of decades together, each touch still precious. "Did you ever imagine," Sarah said one evening in 1905, when they were both in their 50s and had been married for 26 years, "that we would have this, all of this?" "I hoped," Nathaniel replied. "I hoped and worked and prayed, but even my hopes did not quite capture how good it would be. I was so broken when you met me. You were hurt, not broken. There is a difference. You have said that before. Because it is true, you were never broken, Sarah. You just needed time to heal." She leaned against him, comfortable and content. "I healed because of you. We healed each other." And that was true. Nathaniel had found purpose again in loving Sarah, in pulling her back from the edge of despair. And Sarah had given him the family and home he thought he had lost forever. They had saved each other, in all the ways that mattered. In 1910, they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary. All 3 children came home with their families, filling the cabin and surrounding area with noise and life. There were 8 grandchildren now, ranging from 2 to 14, and the chaos was beautiful. During dinner, Thomas stood up with his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said. "To Mama and Papa. You have shown us what love looks like, what strength looks like, what choosing life over despair looks like. We are all here because you both were brave enough to take a chance on each other. So thank you for everything." "Here, here," everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Sarah was crying, but they were happy tears. Nathaniel squeezed her hand under the table, and she squeezed back. After dinner, after the children and grandchildren had scattered to various activities, Sarah and Nathaniel walked to their favorite spot, a clearing on a ridge that overlooked the valley below. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. "Do you remember standing here the evening I proposed?" Nathaniel asked. "Of course, the sky looked just like this. I was terrified you would say no. I was terrified to say yes, but more terrified to say no. I am glad you said yes. So am I." She turned to face him, putting her arms around his waist. Even after all these years, she still had to crane her neck to look up at him. He was as big and solid as ever, his strength undiminished by age. "You gave me everything, Nathaniel. Everything I thought I had lost forever. You gave me just as much. More, maybe. I love you. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too. Always and forever." They kissed as the sun set behind them, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. The years continued their march. Nathaniel's joints began to ache in the winter. Sarah's eyes weakened, requiring her to wear spectacles to read. But they remained healthy and active, still living in their mountain cabin, still walking together each evening. In 1918, influenza swept through Kansas as it swept through the world. It was a terrible disease, killing young and old alike. Sarah and Nathaniel, isolated in their mountains, were mostly safe, but they worried constantly about their children and grandchildren in town. Emily's family was hit hard. Her husband and youngest son both fell ill. The son recovered, but her husband did not. He died in November of that year, leaving Emily a widow at 46. Sarah went to town immediately, staying with her daughter through the grief and helping with the practical matters of death. Watching Emily mourn, Sarah was transported back to her own grief, to the days after the river took her family. But she was also able to offer comfort in a way only someone who had survived such loss could. "It does not feel like it now," she told Emily, "but you will survive this. You will carry the pain, yes, but it will not always be this sharp, and you will find ways to live again, to find joy again." "How long does it take?" Emily asked, her face ravaged by tears. "It is different for everyone. For me, it took 7 years before I could feel anything at all. But I had closed myself off completely. If you let people help you, if you let yourself grieve but also let yourself live, it will not take as long. I do not know how to do that. Neither did I. Your father taught me, and I will teach you if you let me." Emily stayed with her parents for a month, bringing her children to the mountain cabin. The peace and quiet there, so different from the grief-stricken town, helped her find her equilibrium again. She watched her parents interact, saw the deep love and partnership that had sustained them through decades, and found hope that she might be okay someday. "You really love each other, do you not?" she said one evening, watching her parents sit together on the porch, comfortable in their silence. "More than anything," Sarah replied. "I had that with James. For 20 years I had that. I am grateful for the time we had, even though it hurts so much now." "That is good. Hold on to the gratitude. It will help." Emily nodded, wiping away tears. "Thank you, Mama, for understanding. For being here. Always. I will always be here for you." The family survived the flu, though they were forever marked by the loss. Life went on as it always does. Grandchildren became adults and had children of their own. Great-grandchildren appeared, filling Sarah and Nathaniel's later years with new life. They remained in their cabin, stubbornly independent, though Thomas and his family had moved even closer, checking on them daily. Nathaniel still checked his traps, though he moved slower now. Sarah still kept house, though she tired more easily. They were growing old together, and there was grace in that, a blessing they did not take for granted. On a spring morning in 1925, Nathaniel did not wake up. He died in his sleep at the age of 77, his heart simply stopping during the night. Sarah woke next to him, realized what had happened, and for a long moment simply lay there holding his hand. She did not scream or cry or fall apart. She had known this day would come eventually. One of them would have to leave first, and it was not a surprise that it was Nathaniel. He was 6 years older, and though he was strong, he was not immortal. She kissed his forehead gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for making me laugh again. Thank you for this beautiful life." Then she got up and walked to Thomas's cabin to tell him his father was gone. The funeral was large, attended by people from all over Kansas who had known Nathaniel over the years. He was remembered as a good man, a devoted husband and father, a skilled trapper and hunter who understood the mountains better than anyone. But Sarah knew he was more than all of that. He was the man who had saved her life, not with grand gestures but with patient, steady love. After he was buried on the ridge where he had proposed to her, Sarah moved through her grief with a calmness that surprised her children. She was sad, deeply sad, but she was not broken. She had learned too much about living to give up now. "Are you all right, Mama?" Emily asked, worried about her mother living alone in the cabin. "I am," Sarah said truthfully. "I miss him terribly. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I am not afraid of the grief. I know how to survive it now." "Do you want to move to town? Come live with one of us?" "No. I want to stay here. This is where we built our life together. This is where I feel closest to him." So she stayed in the mountain cabin, alone but not lonely. Her children and grandchildren visited often, making sure she had what she needed. But mostly, she sat on the porch in her rocking chair, the one Nathaniel had made her 50 years ago, and remembered. She remembered his patience when she was frozen in grief. She remembered his determination to make her laugh. She remembered their wedding day, the birth of their children, the thousands of small moments that made up a marriage. She remembered his strength and his gentleness, his humor and his wisdom. And she talked to him sometimes, telling him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the changing world, about how much she loved him still. On a summer evening in 1927, 2 years after Nathaniel's death, Sarah sat on the porch watching the sunset. She was 73 years old, her hair completely white, her face lined with years of living. She was tired in a way that told her the end was not far off, but she was not afraid. She thought about her life, about how close she had come to missing all of it. If Nathaniel had not been so stubborn, if she had not been brave enough to try, she would have spent her years in frozen grief, never laughing, never loving, never really living. But she had lived. Oh, how she had lived! She had loved and been loved. She had raised children and taught them to be strong and kind. She had laughed more times than she could count. She had built a life so rich and full that it almost hurt to look back on it, knowing it was ending. "Thank you," she said aloud to the empty air, to Nathaniel wherever he was. "Thank you for making it your life's work to hear me laugh. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for showing me that life after grief is possible, that joy after sorrow is real. I have had such a beautiful life because of you." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Sarah rocked in her chair, peaceful and content. She closed her eyes and smiled, hearing in her memory the sound of laughter, her own and Nathaniel's, echoing through the years. That night, Sarah Owens died in her sleep, just as her husband had. She was found the next morning by Thomas, still sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, the wooden bird Nathaniel had carved for her clasped in her hand. They buried her next to Nathaniel on the ridge, and at the funeral, Emily spoke about her parents' love story. About the woman who never laughed and the mountain man who made it his life's work to hear that sound just once. About how they had saved each other and built a family and lived a life worth celebrating. "They taught us," Emily said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, "that love is worth the risk. That life is worth living even after loss. That laughter can return even after the deepest grief. They gave us the gift of their example, and we are all better for it." The family stood together on that ridge, 3 generations of people who existed because Sarah had been brave enough to love again, because Nathaniel had been patient enough to wait for her. They were his legacy, the proof that his life's work had been worth it. And sometimes, on quiet evenings in the mountains, if you listened very carefully, you could hear the echo of laughter carried on the wind. It was the sound of joy reclaimed, of love triumphant, of 2 souls who had found each other in the darkness and created light that would shine through generations. The cabin still stands on that mountain ridge, maintained now by Thomas's grandson, a 4th-generation mountain man named after his great-grandfather. Inside, on the mantel, sits a wooden bird with wings spread in flight, and a music box with a painted bird on the lid. They are reminders of where it all began, of the gifts that opened a frozen heart, and every year on the anniversary of their wedding, the family gathers at the cabin. They share stories about Sarah and Nathaniel, keeping their memory alive. They talk about the importance of choosing to live, of being brave enough to love even when it is terrifying, of never giving up on people even when they seem unreachable. They talk about laughter and what it means to make joy your life's work. They talk about how one person's patience and love can change everything. They talk about the legacy their great-grandparents left behind, not in wealth or fame, but in the simple, profound truth that love heals, that hope endures, that life is always worth living. And as they gather on the porch at sunset, watching the mountains that Sarah and Nathaniel loved, sometimes they swear they can feel their presence. A warmth in the air, a sense of peace, a whisper of laughter on the wind. It is fanciful, perhaps, but it is also true in the way that matters most. Because love like theirs does not die. It echoes forward through time, touching everyone it reaches, reminding them that even in the darkest moments there is hope. Even when you think you will never laugh again, someone might come along who makes it their life's work to hear that sound. Someone who sees through your walls to the wounded person inside and loves you anyway. Someone who waits with infinite patience while you find your way back to life. Someone who reminds you that joy is possible, that love is real, that the risk is worth taking. Sarah and Nathaniel found each other in a small town in Kansas in 1878, 2 broken people who needed healing. They built a life in the mountains, raised a family, and loved each other for 47 years. It was not a famous story or an extraordinary one by the world's standards. But it was everything to them. And to their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, it was proof that miracles happen, that frozen hearts can thaw, that people who have given up on laughter can learn to laugh again. All it takes is someone who cares enough to try. Someone who makes it their life's work to bring joy back to a soul that has forgotten how to feel it. Someone who loves without conditions, waits without complaining, and believes without evidence that the person they love is worth saving. Nathaniel was that person for Sarah. And she, in turn, became that person for him, pulling him out of his own isolation, giving him purpose and family and love. They saved each other, and in doing so, they created something beautiful that lasted long after they were gone. That is the story of the woman who never laughed and the mountain man who made it his life's work to hear that sound just once. It is a story about grief and healing, about patience and love, about choosing to live even when it would be easier to give up. It is a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth passing down through generations. Because we all need reminders that no matter how dark things seem, no matter how frozen our hearts become, there is always hope for spring. There is always the possibility of laughter returning. There is always someone who might care enough to help us find our way back to joy. Sarah found that in Nathaniel. And together, they built a life that proved love is stronger than grief. Hope is stronger than despair. And laughter, once reclaimed, is the sweetest sound in the world.